Nice launch check and countdown net. Pad is clear.
10, 9, 8.
Launch auto sequence
7,
has started.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Go for launch.
Vehicle is supersonic.
Stage separation confirmed. Dragon, separation confirmed. Stage 1 is transonic. Landing legs have deployed. And Falcon 9 has landed.
We're about 30 seconds away.
T-minus 30 seconds.
Range and weather continuing to look good. Let's watch.
$15. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold on. Lift off from the refuel.
Successful liftoff of Falcon 9 from Space Launch Complex 4 East at the Vandenberg Space Force Base, carrying the Iridium OneWeb satellites into orbit. We've begun gimbaling the engines on the first stage. Gimbaling is really just tilting the engines. We've begun what's called a gravity turn. We're letting gravity help pull the rocket to go sideways. We'll be going fast horizontally to get into orbit. We actually just got through the throttle bucket.
Vehicle supersonic.
Throttle bucket being where we've throttled down the Merlin 1D engines in preparation for max Q. That's the point of highest stresses on the vehicle.
Max Q.
Fantastic views from this ground tracking cam. Nice to be out of the Vandenberg fog. Now, a rocket needs to go about 17,500 miles an hour horizontally in order to avoid being pulled back down to Earth. And if it does get to that velocity, that's what we say that's what we mean when we say we're getting to orbit. So we're continuing to accelerate on the first stage. Call out there of MVAC chill. That's for the next several events we've got coming up. The first of those is main engine cutoff, where we'll shut down these 9 Merlin 1D engines on the first stage. That'll be followed by stage separation, where the first and second stages will separate from each other. The Merlin vacuum on the second stage will ignite at SES-1. And then we will have the fairing halves separate shortly after that around the T+3 minute mark. So again, those events back to back: MECO, stage sep, SES-1, and then shortly after, fairing separation.
MECO.
Stage separation confirmed.
MVAC ignition.
And there are great views of that shortened MVAC nozzle. Right-hand side of your screen is the second stage. Left-hand side of your screen is the first stage. We've begun deploying the hypersonic grid fins on the first stage. Those are those structures that are popping into view right now. Next major milestone will be a fairing deployment. If you keep a close eye out, you might even see those fairings behind the second stage as they trail away.
Fairing separation confirmed.
And there is successful separation of the fairings. Now both the fairing halves, in fact, there's a view of one of the fairing halves on the right-hand side of your screen, making its way back to Earth. Both of these fairing halves are flight proven, one of them having flown 3 times and the other one for its 6th time. And we will be attempting to recover both halves once they make it back to Earth using our recovery vessel named Go Beyond. T+4 minutes. If you're joining us, welcome. You're looking at a live view of Falcon 9. Right-hand side of your screen is the 2nd stage in the first of 2 planned Merlin vacuum engine burns. This burn will last about another 4 minutes on the 2nd stage. It's carrying our 21 payload satellites into orbit. On the left-hand side of your screen, we've got Falcon 9's first stage. Those periodic white bursts that you're seeing are actually from our attitude control system. We're reorienting the first stage to get the engines pointing down back towards the atmosphere, because we're coming up on Falcon 9 first stage's next major milestone as well.
Both vehicles are following nominal trajectories.
Call it there indicating that we are on the path we intend to be on. Now the first stage is pointing its engines down in preparation for the entry burn. Entry burn is where we relight 3 of the Merlin 1D engines on the first stage. We relight the center engine and then 2 of the radial engines. And that maneuver is to slow down the first stage. We've picked up quite a bit of velocity in lofting the 2nd stage and getting it started on its path to orbit. And we're going to bleed off a lot of that energy as we come back through the thicker parts of the Earth's atmosphere. So rather than taking all of that heat loading and structural loading directly on the vehicle, we use some of our propellant to slow down a bit. And that's what the purpose of the entry burn is. And reusability is really what makes the cost of spaceflight lower and enables more scientific research and infrastructure development in low Earth orbit like we're doing today.
Stage 1, FTS was saved.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
There is startup of the entry burn. This should be a pretty short burn. Falcon 9 making its entry burn for its 11th time, this particular booster having flown 11 missions. Total burn duration, just about 20 seconds on the first stage.
Stage 1 entry burn shutdown.
And then followed by a little bit of attitude gas there just to get us pointed in the re-entry attitude that we want to be in. Now from there on, the first stage actually has those 4 grid fins.
Following nominal trajectories.
And as we get into the thicker atmosphere, we get more control off of those grid fins. They'll actually do most of the pointing. We don't need to use attitude gas or the engines to do that until the landing burn starts. Now the landing burn will coincide with 2nd engine cutoff on the
Stage 1 transonic.
2nd stage. 2nd engine cutoff expected around T plus 8 minutes, 45-ish seconds.
Stage 2, FTS was saved.
Stage 2 terminal guidance. Stage 1 landing burn. Stage 1 landing leg deploy. Impact shutdown. Stage 1 landing is confirmed.
Okay, a lot of things happened there, but I see a successful landing
Nominal orbit insertion.
of our Falcon 9 first stage. We had a 2nd engine cutoff there. You heard the call out for nominal orbital insertion. So we're in our first parking orbit for the 2nd stage. And on the first stage, that marked the 193rd recovery of an orbital class rocket, including first stage landings for both Falcon 9 and Heavy. Now, of course, the mission isn't over yet. We've just done the first part. The 2nd stage is embarking on its first coast phase. After this coast phase, we're going to relight that Merlin vacuum engine for a 2nd time. That'll be around the T plus 55 minute mark.
Expected loss of signal, Vandenberg.
So we're going to leave you with some views and some space tunes. And we'll see you back here in about 45 minutes for our second engine start number 2.
Acquisition of signal, Easter Island. Detected loss of signal, Easter Island.
Welcome back to the webcast for the Iridium OneWeb mission. Now, we've had a great mission so far. We had an on-time liftoff at 6:16 a.m. Pacific time from Slick 4 East in the Vandenberg Space Force Base in California. You're looking at a live view of the second stage on orbit as it's preparing for its second planned MVAC burn. Up to this point, we had a successful ascent and a successful orbital insertion on the second stage, and we also recovered our first stage, marking its 11th landing. And we're coming up just about 10 seconds away from a second ignition of the Merlin vacuum engine to put the Iridium OneWeb payloads into the payload deploy orbit.
Acquisition of signal, Malindi, East Africa.
MVAC ignition. MVAC shutdown.
And there was a successful burn of the second stage engine. Super fast burn, just a couple of seconds.
Nominal orbit insertion.
And with that call out there, operators confirming that we are in the intended payload deployment orbit. Just a little bit of orbital mechanics. That initial burn that we did about 45 minutes ago was the orbit insertion burn. That put us into what's called an elliptical orbit. An elliptical orbit, there's a high point, which is referred to as the apogee, the highest point around Earth, and a low point, or the perigee. And those 2 points are different on an ellipse. This last burn actually put us into a circular orbit, roughly 620 kilometers above the Earth's surface, for payload deployment. And you can actually see a couple of those payloads on your screen. We're looking at a couple of the OneWeb satellites and a view of planet Earth at the top of the second stage. Now, if you burn along your direction of travel, it turns out via orbital mechanics and the physics that that'll raise the opposite side of the ellipse that you're on. And if you notice, we're at about 630 kilometers in altitude right now. So the burn we just took raised the lowest point of our orbit into the circle. And of course, at this point in the mission, we've actually consumed a fair amount of propellant on the second stage. So Merlin Vacuum's thrust is able to give us most of the acceleration we needed to hit the desired orbital energy pretty quickly, hence that super short burn. As a reminder, the 21 Iridium and OneWeb satellites are still attached to Falcon 9's second stage. In fact, we're getting some great views of them. And we're coming up on the first payload deployment sequence at T plus about 59 minutes, so just about 2 minutes away from now. This first deployment sequence is going to have 8 deployment events, consisting of deployment of all 5 of the Iridium satellites that we're flying today, and the first 6 of 16 of the OneWeb satellites that we're flying. And we're not sure if we're going to have video coverage of the first deployment sequence, but we are expecting to have telemetry. We're going to be starting with payload deploy just a few seconds from now.
Iridium 5, separation confirmed.
So with that call out there, the first Iridium satellite is away.
Iridium 4, separation confirmed.
And there's confirmation of the second Iridium satellite having deployed, so 3 more attached to the top of the second stage. Satellites typically fly on a payload adapter, which is at the top of the second stage. During ascent, that payload adapter was covered by the fairing to protect the payloads.
Iridium 3, separation confirmed.
So 3 out of 5 Iridium satellites successfully deployed. 2 more to go. And you may notice today that we are flying north across the coast of Africa.
Iridium 2, separation confirmed.
So we flew out of a polar orbit out of Vandenberg a polar orbit is exactly what it sounds like. It basically means we fly in a trajectory where the stage and then the payloads are flying pole to pole, perpendicular to the spin of the planet.
Iridium 1, separation confirmed.
And great news there, we've had successful deployment of all 5 of the Iridium satellites that were flying on today's mission. Coming up next, we've got the first of 3 deployment events scheduled for OneWeb in this first deployment sequence.
OneWeb Alpha 2 and Alpha 6, separation confirmed.
Great news there. First of the OneWeb deployment events is complete and successful. Now we are expecting these next 2 events to happen during a period of LOS, or loss of signal. And that's where we would expect to not have live data, which will slow down that separation confirmation until we can get signal a few minutes from now. So we're going to confirm these deployments in a few minutes when we do regain telemetry. For during this blackout period.
OneWeb Alpha 1 and Alpha 5, separation confirmed.
Oh, and it looks like we do actually have reasonable ground station coverage.
Expected loss of signal, Melendi.
And there's the LOS. Looks like we managed to get a little bit of additional signal. So that last OneWeb deployment we'll expect to get back when we get coverage a few minutes from now as we get over the North Pole. Now, there is a second set of deployment events happening around the T+1 hour and 21-minute mark, so don't go away. We've still got, I think, 12 OneWeb satellites on board. For now, we're going to leave you with any views we might get and some space tunes. But we'll see you back here in about 10 minutes when we're expected to regain ground station coverage to confirm the last payload deployment from this first set. See you soon. Welcome back to the Iridium OneWeb mission webcast. Now, we just went through a loss of signal period where we didn't have any data coverage to confirm the last deployment event from the first deployment sequence. We're expecting to regain telemetry shortly here as we pass into coverage from the Svalbard station. And then we should be able to hear confirmation of the last deployment event.
OneWeb Bravo 8 and Bravo 4, separation confirmed.
And fantastic news, that confirms deployment of all 11 of the spacecraft from the first deployment sequence. The mission isn't over yet, though.
Acquisition of signal, Svalbard.
We do have one more deployment sequence, which is set to begin in about 5 minutes. We are hoping to have live views for those deployments of the remaining OneWeb satellites. So stay tuned. We'll see you back here in just a few minutes around T+121 for the second payload deployment sequence. See you soon. Welcome back to the Iridium OneWeb mission webcast. If you're just joining us, we've had a really great mission so far. We lifted off on time, 6:16 a.m. from Vandenberg Space Force Base. We had a successful first stage landing, 2 successful second stage burns, and successful deployment of all 11 spacecraft from the first deployment sequence. We're coming up on the second deployment sequence of 10 additional OneWeb satellites, including their demonstration satellite named JoeySat. We've actually got some great views of the payload adapter with those OneWeb satellites.
OneWeb Alpha 3 and Alpha 7 separation confirmed.
And there is both mission control and visual confirmation of OneWeb satellite deployment. We may be able to see it here in a minute. You might have noticed from the views that the second stage has a slight rotation that's intended.
OneWeb Bravo 5 and Bravo 1 JoeySat separation confirmed.
And there is confirmation of the next 2 satellites, including OneWeb's demonstration satellite. Now, OneWeb satellites also operate in a polar orbit, meaning they fly around the poles of planet Earth as the Earth rotates below. Each of these satellites will see a different part of the globe and be able to provide connectivity services.
OneWeb Alpha 8 and Alpha 4 separation confirmed.
So just 4 remaining OneWeb satellites on today's mission. If you're just joining us, welcome. You came at a great time. We're coming up on the last set of payload deployment events for today's mission. Lifted off about an hour and a half ago from Vandenberg.
OneWeb Bravo 7 and Bravo 3 separation confirmed.
Two more successful deployments. Kind of cool seeing the reflection off of that satellite coming back on the adapter fitting. We are in view of the sun. Now these satellites are quite packaged up right now for deployment, but eventually they will extend their solar arrays and antennas, which you can see on your screen right now.
OneWeb Bravo 6 and Bravo 2 separations confirmed. All Iridium and OneWeb separations confirmed.
And with that, Mission Control said it perfectly. All the satellites have been deployed, including the 5 Iridium satellites during the first sequence, and now all of the 16 OneWeb satellites. So that's going to wrap up our coverage for today's launch. All of us at SpaceX want to give a big thank you to our customers, Iridium and OneWeb, for entrusting us with today's mission. We also got to give a shout out to the Range and the Federal Aviation Administration for supporting today's mission. We thank them for that. And today's launch concludes our 232nd overall mission to date and our 33rd launch of this year. To all our viewers, thanks a bunch for tuning in today, and we'll see you again for our launch real soon.